Day after day, for months, every morning at exactly 6:30 a.m., a black janitor quietly showed up with breakfast for a 72-year-old woman. A peanut butter sandwich wrapped in paper. A banana. Hot coffee poured carefully from a dented thermos. Not a single day missed. The same bus stop. The same cold concrete. The same corner where the old woman slept each night, wrapped in thin blankets the city had forgotten. The janitor was 30 years old. His name was Malik Johnson, an African-American man working 2 janitorial jobs in 2 different buildings just to keep his bills paid. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just someone who refused to look away. The woman was 72, white, homeless, and always talking about memories and stories from a life people no longer believed existed. Most people slowed down for a moment, nodded politely, then walked on. But Malik stayed. And then one morning, everything changed. Before we continue this unbelievable true-to-life style story, take a second to support the channel. If stories about kindness, hidden pasts, and life-changing moments move you, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Now let's begin. Malik Johnson's alarm rang at 4:45 a.m. every morning, long before the sun even thought about rising. He lived in a small studio apartment on the south side of the city, where the walls were thin and the heat barely worked in winter. He washed his face in cold water, pulled on his worn jacket, and headed out into the dark streets. By 5:30 a.m., he was already on the bus, heading toward his first janitorial job downtown. That bus stop, the one near the old library, was where he met her. The first time Malik noticed the woman, it was raining. She sat on the concrete bench, clutching a plastic bag, her hair damp and gray, her shoes worn down to the sole. People walked past her like she was part of the sidewalk. Malik almost did too. Almost. But then she looked up and smiled at him, like she recognized him from somewhere. That smile stopped him cold. The next morning, Malik brought a sandwich. He didn't announce it. He didn't make a speech. He just handed it to her and said, "Morning, ma'am." Her hands shook as she took it. "You didn't have to do this," she said. Malik shrugged. "I know, but I wanted to." That became their routine. Every morning at 6:30, Malik showed up. Rain, snow, freezing wind, it didn't matter. Sometimes he was exhausted from working late the night before. Sometimes his own stomach growled as he handed over the food. But he never missed a day. The woman told him her name was Eleanor Whitmore. She spoke with a soft, educated tone that didn't match the way the world treated her now. She talked about traveling, about big homes with long hallways, about knowing people whose names sounded important. Most folks assumed she was confused. Malik didn't. He listened. Eleanor talked while she ate, sipping the coffee slowly like it was something precious. She told stories about her husband, about Washington, about a life connected to service and sacrifice. Malik never interrupted. He never corrected her. He never laughed. He just listened, because he knew what it felt like when no one believed your story mattered. Malik had learned that lesson early. He grew up bouncing between foster homes, learning how to stay quiet, how to stay invisible. Teachers expected less from him. Employers watched him closer. The world had taught him that kindness was rare, but when you found it, you held on to it. So when he saw Eleanor shivering on that bench, something inside him decided this was where kindness belonged. Weeks passed, then months. Some mornings Eleanor wasn't there yet, and Malik would wait, worried. Other mornings she was already sitting, smiling when she saw him coming. "I knew you'd come," she'd say. To her, Malik wasn't just a janitor. He was proof that the world hadn't completely forgotten her. One morning, Eleanor looked unusually serious. She ate quietly, then reached into her bag and pulled out an old, folded photograph. It showed a younger woman standing beside a man in a military uniform. "That was my husband," she said softly. "People don't believe me when I tell them who he was, or what we did." Malik nodded. "I believe you," he said without hesitation. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Neither of them noticed the black SUV parked across the street that morning. Neither noticed the man inside watching quietly. And Malik had no idea that the simple breakfasts he brought each day were about to uncover a past so powerful that it would bring the U.S. military straight to Eleanor's door and change his life forever. The black SUV didn't belong there. It sat across the street from the bus stop, engine running, windows tinted so dark no one could see inside. Malik noticed it only because it had been there 2 mornings in a row. He didn't think much of it. Downtown was full of strange vehicles, people watching other people, lives intersecting for reasons no one ever explained. He handed Eleanor her breakfast like always, but that morning she barely touched the sandwich. Her hands trembled as she wrapped her fingers around the warm coffee. She kept looking over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the street like she was waiting for something or someone. "Everything okay today?" Malik asked gently. Eleanor hesitated, then gave a small smile. "Some mornings, the past feels closer than others," she said, "like it's breathing down your neck." Malik didn't fully understand, but he nodded. "Well, you're safe right now," he said. "That's what matters." She looked at him with a strange mix of sadness and gratitude. "You have no idea how much that means." That afternoon, after Malik finished his second janitorial shift, he went home exhausted. He heated a can of soup and fell asleep on the couch with the TV still on. He didn't know that just a few miles away, Eleanor Whitmore was being escorted into a modest assisted living apartment arranged suddenly and quietly by a city agency that moved faster than normal. No press, no paperwork delays, just signatures and silence. 3 days passed. On the fourth morning, Malik arrived at the bus stop at 6:30 a.m. sharp. Eleanor wasn't there. He waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The concrete bench sat empty, cold, untouched. Malik checked his phone, then looked down the street. A strange uneasiness settled in his chest. Eleanor had never been late. Not once. Rain, snow, sickness, she was always there. He left the breakfast on the bench and went to work, but his mind wasn't on mopping floors. It was on that empty spot. That same morning, Eleanor sat at a small kitchen table in her new apartment when a loud, deliberate knock echoed through the room. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't casual. It carried weight, authority, history. She opened the door slowly. 2 men stood outside in full U.S. military dress uniforms. Their posture was rigid, their expressions respectful but serious. Behind them stood a woman in a dark suit holding a folder pressed tightly to her chest. "Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore?" one of the officers asked. Eleanor straightened her back. Her voice was calm. "Yes, I've been expecting you." The officer nodded. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you regarding classified matters from 1968. The woman in the suit glanced down the hallway, then back at Eleanor. "May we come in?" Eleanor stepped aside without a word. As they sat, the officer placed a photograph on the table, the same one Eleanor had shown Malik. The younger woman, the man in uniform. "Your husband, Colonel James Whitmore," the officer said. "One of the most decorated intelligence officers in U.S. military history." Eleanor closed her eyes. "For decades," the woman in the suit continued, "records related to his final mission were sealed. Recently, new information surfaced. It confirms that you were not just his wife, but an active participant." Eleanor opened her eyes. "I did what I was asked," she said quietly. "I served my country." The officer leaned forward. "Ma'am, you were presumed dead after 1971. Your name was removed for your protection. But now, we need your testimony." Back across town, Malik finished his shift and returned to the bus stop. Eleanor still wasn't there. The breakfast was gone, but untouched. He felt foolish for worrying so much, yet something told him this wasn't just a missed morning. The next day, the black SUV returned. This time, it stopped directly in front of Malik as he stood at the bench. A man in a dark coat stepped out. "Malik Johnson?" he asked. Malik's heart jumped. "Yeah, that's me. We need to talk," the man said, glancing at the empty bench. "About the woman you've been feeding." Malik swallowed hard. "Is she okay?" The man studied him for a long moment, then said words Malik would never forget. "She's a lot more than okay. And because of your kindness, history is about to remember her again." And in that moment, Malik realized something terrifying and incredible at the same time. His simple act of compassion had placed him at the center of a story far bigger than himself. Malik stood frozen on the sidewalk as the man in the dark coat waited for his response. The city noise around them felt distant, muted, like the world had stepped back to watch what would happen next. "I don't understand," Malik finally said. "I just brought her breakfast." The man nodded slowly. "That's exactly why we're here." He introduced himself as Daniel Reeves, a civilian liaison working with the Department of Defense. His voice was calm, professional, but his eyes carried urgency. Mrs. Whitmore is safe, he said, answering Malik's biggest fear first. But the relationship you formed with her, it matters more than you realize. They walked a few steps away from the bus stop. Daniel explained that Eleanor Whitmore had been living under an assumed identity for decades, protected by layers of bureaucracy and silence. After her husband's classified mission went wrong in the late 1960s, Eleanor disappeared by design. She was given a new name, a quiet life, and one rule above all others: never draw attention. But time had a way of eroding even the strongest protections. Records resurfaced. Names reappeared. And now the military needed her to close a chapter that had been left open for over 50 years. Why me? Malik asked, his voice low. I'm nobody. Daniel looked at him carefully. You're the only person she trusts. That answer hit harder than Malik expected. Later that day, Malik sat in a small government office, hands folded tightly in his lap. Eleanor sat across from him, wearing clean clothes provided by social services, her posture straighter than he'd ever seen. For the first time, she didn't look like a homeless woman on a bench. She looked like someone who had once commanded rooms. I'm sorry I disappeared without saying goodbye, she said softly. I didn't want you involved. Malik shook his head. I just wanted to know you were okay. She smiled at him, eyes shining. You gave me dignity when I had none. That's why they're scared. Over the next few days, Malik learned pieces of the truth. Eleanor had been more than a military wife. She had been an intelligence asset, moving information through social circles no one suspected. When her husband was killed overseas, she completed the mission alone, then vanished to protect the operation and herself. The country moved on. She did not. But now, with declassified files and a renewed investigation, Eleanor was being asked to testify before a closed congressional committee. The story would eventually come out. And when it did, the world would ask how a woman like her ended up homeless. The answer, Malik realized, was simple. She had been forgotten. One evening, Eleanor asked Malik to walk with her outside the facility. I don't have much time left, she said. But I don't want my story told as a tragedy. Promise me something. What's that? Malik asked. When they talk about me, she said, make sure they talk about you too. About kindness. About choosing to see people. Malik swallowed hard. I don't need credit. I know, she said. That's why you deserve it. The day of Eleanor's testimony arrived quietly. No cameras. No crowds. Just a black car, guarded doors, and a room full of people who finally understood who she was. Malik waited outside, pacing, replaying every morning at the bus stop in his mind. When the doors finally opened, a senior officer approached him. Mr. Johnson, he said, extending his hand. On behalf of the United States government, thank you. For what? Malik asked. For reminding us who we forgot. 2 weeks later, Malik's life changed in ways he never imagined. A foundation was created in Eleanor's name, focused on homeless veterans and seniors. Malik was offered a full-time position running outreach programs. No janitorial shifts, no night buses, no empty benches. The first check he received came with a handwritten note from Eleanor. You fed me when the world wouldn't. Now go feed hope. Malik stood at the same bus stop one last time, holding that note, understanding that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness don't just change one life. They wake up an entire nation. The story didn't break with flashing headlines or breaking news alerts. It leaked quietly, the way truth often does after being buried too long. A single paragraph appeared in a late-night online article about a declassified Cold War intelligence operation. Most people skimmed past it, but one line stopped readers cold. It mentioned a woman once listed as missing, presumed dead, now confirmed alive. Eleanor Whitmore, a former intelligence asset who had lived for years without recognition or protection. Within days, that paragraph turned into a flood. Journalists started asking questions. How did a woman tied to one of the most sensitive operations in U.S. history end up homeless? How did the government lose track of her? And who was the man mentioned briefly at the end of one report? The janitor who fed her every morning. Malik watched the news from his small apartment, stunned. His phone buzzed nonstop. Old coworkers, local reporters, a producer from a morning show. He ignored most of it, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. He had never wanted to be seen. He had just wanted to help. Eleanor, now staying in a secure medical facility, followed the coverage calmly. They're finally listening, she said when Malik visited. But they're missing the point. What's the point? Malik asked. That kindness doesn't need permission, she replied. And it doesn't need a uniform. Public reaction was split. Many were outraged, demanding accountability. Others focused on Malik. Social media filled with posts calling him a hero. Donations poured into the newly formed Eleanor Whitmore Foundation. Malik felt uncomfortable with the praise. He still rode the bus, still wore the same jacket, still believed he was just a man who brought breakfast to someone hungry. One afternoon, Malik was invited to speak at a small community event honoring volunteers. He almost said no. Public speaking terrified him. But Eleanor insisted. People need to hear it from you, she said. Not from headlines. Standing at the podium, Malik's hands shook. He looked out at the crowd, faces of all ages, all colors. I didn't help Eleanor because of who she was, he said slowly. I helped her because of who she was becoming invisible to. There are a lot of people like that out there. The room went silent. That speech was shared millions of times. Offers followed. Book deals. Paid interviews. Endorsements. Malik turned most of them down. He agreed only to work that aligned with the foundation's mission. He began visiting shelters, speaking with city leaders, pushing for better systems to protect seniors and veterans. Meanwhile, a formal apology was issued by the Department of Defense. It didn't erase the past, but it acknowledged it. Eleanor watched the statement on television, her expression unreadable. An apology is a start, she said. But action is what matters. Her health, however, was failing. Years of hardship had taken their toll. Malik spent as much time with her as he could, reading to her, bringing breakfast like he always had, peanut butter sandwiches, bananas, hot coffee. Some routines were too important to change. One quiet morning, Eleanor took Malik's hand. Promise me something else, she whispered. Anything. Don't let this story end with me. Malik nodded, tears in his eyes. It won't. When Eleanor passed away peacefully days later, the news spread quickly. Flags were lowered at one federal building. A small, private military honor was held. No cameras, no speeches, just respect. Malik stood at the bus stop the next morning, holding 2 coffees out of habit. He set one down on the bench, letting the steam rise into the cold air. People passed by, some recognizing him, some not. He realized then that this spot would always matter, not because of what happened here, but because of what could happen anywhere, if someone chose to stop. The morning after Eleanor's funeral, the city felt different to Malik, like it had lost a quiet heartbeat most people never knew was there. He stood at the bus stop longer than usual, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, watching commuters rush past with their heads down. The bench was empty now, but in Malik's mind, Eleanor was still there, smiling, telling stories, sipping her coffee like it was a luxury. For months, that small patch of concrete had been their world. Now it was a memory, but a powerful one. Malik didn't return to his janitorial jobs, not because he was ashamed of them, but because life had opened a new door he couldn't ignore. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation officially launched its first outreach center just 6 weeks later. It wasn't fancy. No marble floors. No grand signs. Just warm lights, clean tables, and hot food served with respect. Malik made sure of one thing above all else. Everyone who walked through the door was greeted by name, or at least by a smile. On the wall near the entrance hung a single framed photograph. It was Eleanor and Malik at the bus stop, taken quietly by a volunteer one morning. Beneath it were simple words, "See the people others overlook." The foundation grew quickly. Cities reached out. Volunteers signed up. Formerly homeless seniors shared stories of being helped when they had lost hope. Malik traveled, not as a celebrity, but as a witness. Everywhere he went, he told the same truth, that he hadn't changed the world. He had just changed one morning for one person, and that had been enough to start something bigger. One evening, Malik received a letter postmarked from Washington, D.C. Inside was a folded American flag and a short note from the Department of Defense. It thanked him for restoring dignity to someone who had served in silence. Malik held the flag carefully, understanding that honor didn't always come from medals, it came from memory. Years later, Malik still woke up early, still made peanut butter sandwiches sometimes, just out of habit. On cold mornings, he'd stop by that old bus stop, now cleaner, brighter, with a small plaque placed quietly by the city. It didn't mention the military. It didn't mention intelligence or secrets. It simply read, "Kindness happened here." People often asked Malik how it felt to change someone's life. He always gave the same answer. She changed mine first, he'd say. She reminded me that no one is invisible unless we choose not to see them. And somewhere in the rush of the city, in the noise of buses and footsteps and mornings that come too fast, Malik believed Eleanor's story lived on, not as a tale of loss, but as proof that compassion, given freely and quietly, can echo louder than history itself. Because sometimes, the most powerful knock on the door isn't made by the military. It's made by kindness, showing up every morning, right on time.